Nothing new is going to be added with these funds, so it's not like we're trying to add these other positions or do all these extra things. It's just simply to keep status quo of what we currently offer this year and for many years to come. Without budget relief, we will need to make significant budget changes. And so as an administrative team, Keith and I and all of our administrators have sat down and we've kind of calculated and come up with a plan is if the referendum passes, status quo, awesome. If the referendum doesn't pass, these are the cuts that we're going to have to make. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that and what it looks like. I think a really important point is why we put it in red is this is a key point. Keith and I have been involved in education field for a long time, both of us over 30 years. Most time when you see an operational referendum, this is very unique for an operational referendum. And what this means is the school board agrees to eliminate or reduce the amount of the referendum approved levy if the state provides the district with some additional funds. Please, come on in. Thanks. Oh wow, you got double duty. All right. Thanks for coming here. And so what that means, let's say for example, we're going to ask the community for 3.9 or 4. Original was that for 4.9. The state gives us $1 million, then that would be money that we would levy less. Okay? So the board has agreed and committed to this so that everyone understands that we will levy less depending on what the state decides to give us. Unfortunately, we don't always know that information. We certainly will not know this year, and we typically do not know in any year when it's the first year of the biennial budget. And so, as a result of that, we're not going to know at the time and when we have to make these budget cuts. And so we'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So kind of give you an idea of why do we need it? Why? Ashwaubenon has always been very strong financially. Again, I'm a little bit partial, but I think we have the best business manager in the state of Wisconsin. I mean, Keith Lucius, and you're going to be able to see his expertise tonight as he talks in more detail about it. But the game was kind of changed on us. And as a result of that, you're going to see more and more school districts, we'll talk about that, who are going to be going through operational referendum. This is not an Ashwaubenon problem, this is a state of Wisconsin problem. And so we'll kind of explain all that. So there was no increase in the state revenue limit for 2021, 22, 23 school years. Our state legislature asked us to use federal ESSER funds, COVID relief funds, to balance our current budget. And so that's one-time money. That's money that was given to us from the federal government to help with student recovery from COVID. And that was supposed to be spent by this June of 2023. Additional state aid was given to us that resulted in property tax relief. So Keith and I are both property owners, homeowners here in Ashwaubenon. We pay property taxes just like everyone else. So we had some relief given to us from the state. So the state didn't give us anything. They gave us state aid, but they didn't give us as schools any money in our revenue limit to spend on students. Okay? Inflation has increased costs significantly, approximately 4.7 for the 2021 school year. As all of you might have known, it's over 8% for 2022. In fact, CPI closed, I think, at 8.02, and estimated to be about 7% in 2023. So between all that, significant increases in contracted services, we're no different than any other business, right? We have to, as inflation goes up, our costs go up. Our busing costs go up, lamers, the price of gas, we've all seen that, right? All that impacts school districts just as much as other businesses. Just our cleaning services, all those contracted services that we have are no different than any other business. Staffing costs have increased. Just like everyone else has experienced, supply chain issues have made it more expensive for us to get our technology, our computers, and those materials. New staff have been hard to hire in the current competitive employment market. I think most of our business owners in Ashwaubenon would say the same thing. Keith and I gave the same presentation to the Ashwaubenon Business Association, and we're all seeing the shortage of employees, right? And so this competitive market hasn't helped that either. Oh, I'm doing this one, yeah. Thank you. So you can kind of see, this is an example so everyone kind of understands what this graph means. It's per resident student spending, okay? So that means how much we spend on school districts for each thing. So we have a revenue limit that we're held to. So that's the orange bar. So right around a little bit over 10,000, as you can see, all the way across. So that's our cost, right? So that's what we get, or we spend on our students per student. So for our 3,200 students, this is what we spend.
So that's what the state allows us to spend.
Thank you. So you can see in 2021, pretty consistent. Inflation was okay. 21-22, you can see quite a bit of increase, but you can clearly see what's going to happen over the next 2 years. And this is currently the year we're in now. Okay? Keith is then going to explain how the COVID money, which we were told to use, fits into all of this.
Okay, so what we're talking about here is the state sets our revenue limit. So we use 2021 as our base year. Is the state keeping up with inflation, keeping up with where our costs are going? And that's where we see the blue bar going up, and that's the inflation going up. What we did, what the state directed us to do, was to use that one-time federal money, the COVID relief money, ESSER funds, to balance our budget. So for 2021, 22, and 23, we used the COVID money to balance our budget. So that's the green bar on there. All that money will be spent by the end of this school year. We also use that COVID money to provide support services for students who are struggling during COVID with being in school, out of school, and trying to help them learning loss recovery and bring them back to where we are. We would have loved to spend all of our ESSER funds on that. We had a really good, effective program going with that to help those students, but the state directed us this way and didn't increase our revenue limit. So the only way we could keep up with what inflation was doing to our costs was to use that federal money to balance it. But after the end of this school year, that money will all be spent. So you can see the shortfall when we talk about a fiscal cliff. That's what this is. If we stay where the revenue limit is, where they haven't given us any increase, that's where we fall. So the one thing I have to explain here is we don't know what the state's going to do revenue limit for 23-24. That could go up, and that's one of the reasons we've got that statement that Kurt made earlier, that if the state gives us some money and the revenue limit allows us to spend some more, we will reduce the amount of the referendum if it's approved by the amount that the state gives us. So we will adjust for that, so we're not double dipping and getting a state increase plus getting a referendum. So we're balancing those two off. Just hit return on there, Kurt. So what we did here is the purple bar signifies if the referendum passes. If the referendum passes, we end up covering those inflationary increases for this coming year, and we still would have some cuts to do the following year that's because the board, after they surveyed the community, reduced the referendum amount to 3.9 million. The original discussion was 4.9 million. We'll talk a little bit later how we came up with those amounts, but to keep up with inflation, that's what happened. So this referendum helps us take care of this cliff here that we would have had otherwise and fill that in. So then the question is, that statement that we made earlier that the board is committed to not taxing the full amount of the referendum if it's approved, if the state gives us something. Kurt, let's go to the next slide. So let's assume the state does give us something, and I use the governor's proposal as a benchmark to kind of show what could happen. So the yellow bar in here shows what the governor's proposal would do for us. So next year, the governor's proposal would make up a portion of what we've lost, and then the following year, the second year, the governor's budget is much larger increase for schools. So what that does is the purple bar is shorter here for next year and even shorter the following year because the state budget is providing some of that in the revenue limit. So what we're doing is reducing the amount. So in this scenario, this is less than 3.9 million. This is actually less than 2 million. So we end up with less of this referendum that we will use, and that's our commitment to the citizens of the communities. We're not going to use that if the state gives us that authority. The problem we have is we won't know what the state's giving us until July or August. We need to set staffing in April. By law, we have to tell teachers if they're going to get laid off or have a job next year by April. So we have to make those decisions. That's why this referendum is so important, so we can make sure we have our staffing set to match our budget next year and not lose our good young teachers. So that's a complicated, a lot of things moving in that graph. Any questions, anything not clear in there, anything I could explain further? So really, this is the basis for why we need a referendum, is without that yellow bar, we have that huge deficit. Without the purple bar for the referendum, that's why we need the referendum.
So part of tonight is we want feedback from you, because it's clear to us, but we live and breathe this every day, right? And so we want to make sure that all Keith just explained, it makes sense to everyone.
Want to hit the next slide, Kurt? So why are we in this situation? Why is this happening? What's happening at the state level? And education has been part of politics for as long as I've been in education. It just is part of the way it works, because it's a big part of the state budget. So what's happened in the state compared to nationally education-wise? This graph shows that in Wisconsin, in 2020, we now rank 25th in the United States on spending per student. Going back 18 years earlier, go back to 2002, we ranked 11th. So what's happening is Wisconsin is not keeping up with other states in the area. And it used to be, when I was younger, people moved to Wisconsin for a great place to raise their kids, a strong education. And I still think we have a strong education, but we can't keep it up when we're funded that much less than other states. And that's one of the problems that's happening statewide, is we're not keeping up with where they are. On top.
So it's proud to say, we might be ranked 25th now.
In
We
spending.
were ranked, instead of 11th, but we're still ranked 8th in the nation in academics. So it's a credit to our schools.
And great teachers and things that are happening, but how long can we
Better be
continue that?
careful laying that out there. They'll say, what do you need more money for?
But
You're already accomplishing.
right, but and that's what this is squeezing us even more than what they've done, because remember, this is 2020, so
Right.
this is before the last state budget where they gave us no increases and we weren't keeping up with inflation, and inflation's gone crazy. So that's where we are. And then on top of that, when you look at how does Ashwaubenon compare to Wisconsin as a state, Ashwaubenon is now a low spending district in a low spending state. So we spent 93.5% of what the Wisconsin state average was in 2021. So we're spending less than the average in the state, and our state is now spending less than the average in the United States. So it's one of those things where we're slowly falling behind on spending. And like Kurt said, we have some great teachers and we're still seeing good educational results, but how long can we maintain that in this scenario? So this is more the state controls in our spending and what's put us in this situation as the state has played with education in the budget and made adjustments in education.